we're finally shutting down your shameful business." The words rang out in the musty air of the bankruptcy courtroom like a gunshot. My brother Vincent spoke them, adjusting his silk tie with such smug satisfaction, as if he'd just dispatched me in a duel. His voice was booming, triumphant. I saw my parents nod approvingly from the gallery, Mom theatrically wiping her dry eyes with a handkerchief, and Dad standing, his jaw clenched until it turned white, the embodiment of righteous condemnation. And I, Gabriella, stood silently at the defendant's table. I allowed Vincent's lawyer, a dapper vulture, to present a bogus bankruptcy petition to the judge. I allowed them all to think me broken. Inside, an icy rage seethed within me, and I waited. I waited for the very moment that would shatter everything they thought they knew about my life. But why did Judge Margaret Holloway suddenly freeze mid-sentence? Her hand, holding an expensive fountain pen, hovered over the documents. Her gaze, which had been skimming the text, suddenly focused on a single line. Her eyes, intelligent and tired, widened. She whispered something. The members of the council immediately approached her, leaning over the judge's table. Both lawyers perked up like dogs scenting prey. An oppressive silence fell over the courtroom, broken only by the rustling of papers. Judge Holloway's voice dropped to a sharp, cold whisper that I could barely hear, but every word was dead on target. "Is this the same Apex Defense Systems company that just received a $189 million contract from the Department of Defense? That same contract the Wall Street Journal reported on last week?" Vincent's lawyer muttered something, his confidence cracking for the first time. Judge Holloway looked up from her paperwork, her gaze meeting first his, then my brother's. Her eyes were filled with disbelief, mixed with mounting professional anger. "I'll need to review extensive documentation before we proceed," her voice rang out loud and clear, cutting through the silence like a blade, "because either this is the most incompetent statement I've seen in 30 years of practicing law, or someone is attempting to commit fraud in my courtroom." I saw Vincent's confident, forced smile begin to crack, like thin ice under the weight of the truth. A flicker of animalistic, incomprehensible fear flashed in his eyes. In that moment, the 8 years that had led me here flashed before me like a film reel. I founded Apex Defense Systems 8 years ago in a dank garage with just $3,000 in savings and a blind faith in my idea. The Moretti family didn't build empires in garages. We built prestige. My father, Antonio Moretti, owned a successful chain of luxury car dealerships. Vincent, my older brother, was groomed from infancy to take his place. My younger sister, Carla, married a pale scion of the old aristocracy, and her life dissolved into charity galas and country club gossip. And I, Gabriella, the middle child, the eternal disappointment, dropped out of Wharton to pursue what my father disdainfully called playing with electronics and cybersecurity. "It's a job, not a business, Gabriella," he sneered when I tried to explain my plans. "Defense technology? That's not for us. That's for others. Find a real career. Work at a bank. Meet the right person. You're 24. You know nothing about starting a company. You'll fail and come back expecting us to clean up your mess." "I won't fail," I said then, and it was the only truth I clung to. "That's what they all say. You'll fail." I walked out of his office smelling of expensive wood and cigar smoke, and never again asked him for advice or permission. Those first 5 years were hell. Instant noodles and bitter coffee became my diet. I worked 20 hours a day dreaming of lines of code and federal regulations. I learned by trial and error, and those errors were monstrous. Failed partnerships, missed deadlines, a contract dispute that sucked the last money out of my dwindling account. My family watched from the sidelines with cold curiosity, awaiting the collapse they had predicted. "Still playing with computers?" Vincent asked condescendingly at the Christmas table in the 3rd year. His tone was like a slap in the face. "Dad would say," Mom would say, touching my hand, "we're worried about you." But her eyes simply read, "We're ashamed of you." After the third year, I stopped coming home for the holidays. The energy I was spending on self-defense would have been much better spent on surviving and building a company. And I did build it, crumb by crumb. Apex Defense Systems developed unique cybersecurity protocols for military communications. They could detect and neutralize threats in milliseconds. Our first government contract came in the 4th year, the second in the 5th. By the 7th year, we had 47 employees, annual revenue had exceeded $12 million, and industry publications were calling us the most innovative startup in defense. And then he came. A $189 million contract, a multi-year agreement with the Pentagon, a deal that would forever transform Apex from a daring startup into a serious player. The Wall Street Journal wrote about it. Industry media dissected our technology. Investors besieged my office. But my family knew nothing. I deliberately kept my success a secret, using my married name, Gabriela Santos, for all public appearances. The rare relatives who happened to stumble across mentions of Apex Defense in the press didn't connect the dry, brilliant CEO, G. Santos, with that same Gabriela, the perpetual loser, Moretti. I liked it better that way. It was my quiet, perfect revenge, which I'd been putting off until later. And now that later had arrived, and it was sweeter than any triumph. The commotion in the courtroom was physical, like a shockwave. I no longer needed their approval. I no longer needed it. But it seemed I was yet to face their poisonous, envious interference. This bankruptcy filing was their response. It arrived, as I suspected, exactly 3 weeks after news of the contract leaked to the press. The lawsuit was filed by Vincent. In it, he, my own brother, coldly asserted that Apex Defense Systems owed him $2 million for an investment he allegedly made in the company's 2nd year. The text was full of vicious language. I had defaulted on the repayment terms. The company was insolvent. The creditors needed legal protection. Every word was a poisonous lie. Vincent had never invested a cent in Apex, not a single dollar. He merely smirked condescendingly when I talked about my work. The documents attached to the lawsuit were a crude, brazen forgery. Contracts with forged signatures, loan agreements I'd never seen, financial statements that looked like they'd been concocted by a schoolchild. It was pure fraud. And it was the kind of fraud that, given the slightest chance, could destroy everything. Freeze accounts, scare off investors, jeopardize the fragile world of government contracts where financial stability is the holy grail. My call to the lawyer, Patricia Acuno, was short and furious. She examined the documents, and her verdict echoed icily down the line. They're trying to force you into bankruptcy proceedings with forgeries. This is incredibly stupid. Any expert analysis would tear this to shreds in a matter of hours. But while the lawsuit is pending, it creates a legal quagmire. It could delay the execution of the contract with the Ministry of Defense. That's the whole point. Yes, that was the whole point. Vincent was onto something. He wanted to derail my takeoff at the very last moment. But from where? The answer came to me, bitter and obvious. My mother's cousin worked at a law firm that sometimes helped us with regulatory documents. She must have seen mention of a major contract and let it slip over a family dinner. They didn't understand the scale of what I'd built. They simply smelled success and decided to sink their teeth into it.
Why would they ruin your success? Patricia asked.
Because my success is living proof that they were wrong. And some people can't bear the thought of being wrong, I replied, my voice carrying a calm I didn't feel inside. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning. I arrived early, wearing my armor, an impeccable, understated, dark gray suit. Expensive, but not flashy. Powerful, but not ostentatious. Patricia joined me at the defendant's table, carrying 3 hefty boxes of documents. Our truth, packed in cardboard. Vincent arrived with his parents, making quite a theatrical entrance. I recognized his custom-made suit from a photo in their salon catalog. My mother was dressed in somber, mournful tones. My father carried himself like a monument to insulted family honor, his face stone-faced and his fists clenched. They didn't spare me a glance, not a single one. I was a problem to be solved, not a daughter to be celebrated. Finally facing the consequences, Vincent said to his lawyer, deliberately loudly. This should have happened years ago. A few casual spectators sat in the gallery, a couple of old men who followed every hearing, a weary bankruptcy journalist. None of them suspected they would witness the personal apocalypse of an entire family. Judge Holloway entered. I had studied her reputation beforehand. 30 years of judicial service, ironclad meticulousness, and zero tolerance for fraud. If anyone could spot Vincent's forgery at a glance, it was her. The hearing began. The brother's lawyer, self-assured and smooth, laid out his tale of debt, of default, of the need to rescue creditors. Your Honor, the defendant has systematically avoided repaying a large family loan, preferring to finance an unprofitable enterprise with no prospects. Judge Holloway raised her hand, cutting off his flow. Her voice was calm. The defendant's company, Apex Defense Systems, is based in Alexandria, Virginia? Yes, Your Honor, the lawyer nodded, not understanding the trick. She opened something on her computer. Her fingers tapped rapidly on the keyboard. Then she froze. A silence fell, louder than any scream. And then she gestured for both lawyers to come to her desk. The deliberation at the bench, the inaudible whispers, lasted an eternity. I watched Vincent's confidence melt before my eyes like wax in a flame. His lawyer turned pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. My father, sitting behind me, leaned forward, his expression slowly changing from smug confidence to a confused, animal-like worry. Finally, Judge Holloway leaned back and spoke words that echoed throughout the courtroom, clear and inexorable, like the blade of a guillotine. We'll have a 30-minute recess. During this time, I demand that both sides provide me with comprehensive documentation outlining their positions. All of it, without exception. The 30-minute recess was like the lull before an execution. Vincent's lawyer, trying to speak, met Judge Holloway's gaze, that same gaze that seemed capable of incinerating steel and freezing liquid nitrogen. She didn't raise her voice, but every word fell like a honed guillotine. I strongly urge you and your client to review every document submitted, she said in an icy tone that betrayed not a shred of doubt. Because if I discover fraudulent activity in my courtroom, the consequences will be the most severe. Understood? The murmur in the courtroom died down instantly. Vincent's lawyer, the same dandy, merely nodded, turning as white as a sheet. His tie suddenly felt tight around his throat. Vincent practically rushed toward him, all dignity forgotten. What's going on? What did she say? His whisper was thick with panic, which he could no longer hide. I used the pause not to panic, but to prepare. While they thrashed about, Patricia and I methodically, like surgeons, laid out our truth on the table. This wasn't just a defense, it was an attack. Actual financial statements showing revenue of $12 million and healthy reserves. A redacted version of the Pentagon contract, threatening and authentic. Letters from investors, auditors' reports, 8 years of legitimate, honest work. And then, our weapon, an expert opinion on Vincent's documents. Digital forensic specialists examined his loan agreements and delivered their verdict. They were created 6 days ago. Metadata doesn't lie. Signatures are clumsy forgeries. Numbers are a fabrication from the first to the last digit. Exactly 30 minutes later, Judge Holloway returned to her seat. The silence was absolute. During the recess, I conducted a preliminary review, her voice echoed through the courtroom, and I discovered that Apex Defense Systems is not only not on the verge of bankruptcy, it is, apparently, a very successful defense contractor that just won one of the largest cybersecurity contracts of the current fiscal year. She turned to my brother's lawyer, her gaze filled with cold disdain. Could you explain to the court the basis on which a bankruptcy petition was filed against a financially stable and prosperous company? The lawyer fidgeted, his fingers nervously shuffling through the papers. Your Honor, my client has provided documents confirming the debt. Documents, the judge interrupted, which even upon cursory review blatantly contradict the company's public reports and press reports. Then her gaze fell on me. It was heavy, assessing. Ms. Santos, or rather Ms. Moretti, since the complainant, as it turns out, is your brother, would you like to comment on these allegations? I stood up. My legs were firm, my voice clear and resonant, without a tremor. Your Honor, there is no debt. There were no investments. All the documents submitted by the complainant are flagrant forgeries. My brother has never had anything to do with my company. He filed this lawsuit for the sole purpose of sabotaging my work, because my success is a living reproach to him, a disgrace. A stifled sigh echoed through the courtroom. My words hung in the air, sharp and searing. That's a very serious charge, the judge remarked. I have very serious evidence, I retorted, nodding to Patricia. She started handing out copies of our documents like damning evidence, actual financial statements, forensic evidence of forgery, and the final nail in their coffin, a chronology of Vincent's public statements about me and my case over the past 8 years, a continuous string of ridicule, disdain, and outright hostility. Vincent jumped to his feet, his face contorted in a grimace of rage and fear. This is ridiculous. She's my sister. I have every right to collect the debt from her. What debt, Vincent? My voice sounded calm, almost quiet, and that made it even more terrifying. Name the date of the loan. Provide a bank statement from which the funds were transferred. Give me at least one piece of evidence that won't crumble to dust upon the first inspection. He couldn't, because there was nothing, only envy, malice, and a pathetic forgery on cheap paper. Judge Holloway immersed herself in our documents. For 20 minutes, a deathly silence reigned in the courtroom, broken only by the rustling of pages. Vincent's lawyer looked as if he wanted to sink into the ground. The masks of righteous anger and grief on my parents' faces vanished, replaced by a dull, growing dread. Their plan was crumbling before our eyes, and the debris was flying straight at them. Finally, the judge raised her head. Her face was inscrutable, but a cold fire burned in her eyes. I have reviewed the parties' materials. The forensic results are compelling. The metadata clearly indicate that the applicant's documents were created within the last week, not several years ago, as claimed. The defendant's financial statements confirm stability and the absence of debt to the plaintiff. She turned to Vincent, her gaze heavy as lead. Mr. Moretti, the motion is denied. But your involvement in this court doesn't end there. Filing a fraudulent bankruptcy petition is a federal crime. I am submitting this matter to the U.S. Attorney's Office for investigation for possible perjury and fraud in the courtroom. The judge's words hung in the air, echoing like a metallic ring. Vincent's face turned deathly pale, as if all the blood had been drained from it. He fidgeted, trying to find his bearings in this crumbling world. Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding. There is no fraud here, I swear. There is no misunderstanding here, Judge Holloway's voice was cutting and final. You presented false documents to this court. You claimed debts that didn't exist. You knowingly attempted to fraudulently force a successful company into bankruptcy proceedings. She slowly removed her glasses, and her unsoftened gaze grew even more piercing. Did you realize, Mr. Moretti, that by sabotaging a Department of Defense contractor, you risk not just fraud charges, but far more serious federal charges? The government takes a very dim view of those who jeopardize national security assets. National security? Vincent burst out with a hysterical laugh. But it's just my sister's small tech company. Your sister's small tech company, the judge retorted, each sentence ringing like a sentence, provides critical cybersecurity infrastructure for the United States military. Your actions go beyond fraud. This is a potential national security issue. Then she turned to me, her tone softening, but only slightly. Ms. Santos, I apologize for wasting the court's time on this baseless allegation. Your company's reputation must not be damaged, and I will ensure the record clearly reflects the fraudulent nature of this lawsuit. Thank you, Your Honor, I nodded, my insides swaying with a cold, pure triumph. The case is dismissed. The consequences fell upon them instantly. Court staff had already surrounded Vincent and his pale lawyer, discussing the procedure for handing over the materials to the prosecutor's office. My parents, like ghosts, tried to slip silently toward the exit, but I caught their eye. My father, already at the door, turned around. A storm of emotions raged across his face, emotions I couldn't and didn't want to discern. Abject shame, blind rage, a deafening incomprehension at how their perfect plan had crumbled to dust. Mr. and Mrs. Moretti, my voice was even, without a hint of tremor. I assume you knew about this. My father froze. Gabriella, it was Vincent's idea, his gamble. You were sitting on that bench, I cut him off, and nodding, while your son was trying to destroy everything I built. Don't pretend you weren't a part of it. We thought we were helping, my mother breathed, real tears glistening in her eyes this time. Who? My question hung in the air. If your son is facing prison for federal crimes, will you feel any better knowing you spent 8 years betting on my failure? My mother took a step toward me, extending her hand. We didn't think it would go this far. We thought you were genuinely in trouble. Vincent said. Vincent was saying what you wanted to believe, I interrupted. And you believed it. Because it was easier than admitting you'd been wrong about me all these years. I filed my files neatly, methodically. Each sheet was my shield and sword. The $189 million contract? That's true. The 47 employees who feed their families thanks to Apex? That's true. The technology that now protects American soldiers? That's true too. And you tried to destroy all of that, because my success was unbearable to you. Gabriella, that's enough, my father barked, but his voice no longer held authority, only impotence. I agree, that's enough. Whatever happens to Vincent is his problem, and all the excuses you whisper to yourself before bed, keep to yourself. But don't come near me again. Don't pretend to be my family. Families don't try to ruin each other with fake documents. I turned and walked out of the courtroom. I didn't look back once. It wasn't just the trial that lay behind me. It was my past. The federal investigation, as I expected, was moving like wildfire. Vincent's lawyer, trembling for his license, took a plea bargain and spilled the beans. He explained how Vincent had come to him with this brilliant idea, lying about Apex drowning in debt and disgracing the family name, which needed to be saved. The lawyer admitted his negligence, but the key element, of course, was Vincent. Charges were filed 6 weeks later: bankruptcy fraud, perjury, and attempting to sabotage a government contractor. He faced up to 15 years in prison. My father, of course, threw all his connections and vast sums of money into the fray. He negotiated a plea bargain: 3 years in a minimum security prison instead of 15. But Vincent lost everything: his place in the family business, his reputation, and now the permanent stigma of a convicted federal felon. The car dealership chain survived, but my father had to retire. The reputational damage from having a son as a convicted fraudster proved toxic to his high society clients. As far as I knew, he was now listed as a consultant somewhere, while hired managers were handling the actual management. 6 months after the trial, a letter arrived from my mother. It was saturated with evasive excuses and drawn-out, meaningless phrases. We didn't mean for things to turn out this way. Family must forgive. You understand our position. I didn't respond. Not a single word. Last month, Apex Defense Systems celebrated its 10th anniversary. Our company, my stronghold, has grown to 156 people, It's no longer a startup, but a respected force. Our contracts with the Department of Defense have expanded and now amount to a solid $340 million over the next 5 years. We've opened a second plant in Colorado, and plans for Texas are already on my desk. The Wall Street Journal, the same one that once wrote about our contract, published a follow-up under the catchy headline, "Defense Startup Survives Family Sabotage Attempt." I gave a single interview, brief, carefully crafted. I talked about legal lessons, the importance of due diligence, carefully avoiding the harsh realities of family drama. But the journalist, of course, dug deeper.
Why do you think your brother did that?
I looked straight into the camera, and at that moment, I didn't care who heard my answer. Some people can't stand being wrong. It's easier for them to destroy someone else's success than to admit they were wrong about their own judgment. "Do you still keep in touch with your family?" came the inevitable question. A small but firm smile touched my lips. I have a wonderful relationship with the family I created myself, with my employees, my partners, my husband, with the people who believed in me when all I had was a garage and a crazy idea. My biological relatives made their choice. I made mine. That was the end of the interview. Some questions don't require lengthy answers. One bitter truth is enough. Last week, a letter arrived from Carla, my younger sister. She always kept a low profile during family storms, too preoccupied with her social ascent in high society. But apparently the scandal has reached her country club. The whispers about a criminal brother and complicit parents had apparently become too loud. "I know you probably don't want to hear anything from any of us," she wrote, "but I wanted you to know I never approved of the way they treated you. I was too cowardly to say anything, but I always believed you would prove them wrong." A half apology dictated by convenience. She tried to disavow the disaster by presenting herself as a secret ally. I responded with one line: "Support given silently when it was most needed is merely complicity, but thank you for the letter." And it wasn't sarcasm. I hadn't forgiven her, but I appreciated this timid, belated gesture. Growth, even the beginning of a conscience, has to start somewhere. And the most important growth in my life happened 3 months ago. My daughter, Elena. I named her after my grandmother, the only one of all the Morettis who believed in me until the very end, but who didn't live to see Apex become a reality. On her deathbed, she made me promise not to give up. Now I hold Elena in my arms in the nursery of our house, the house I bought with my own money, in the neighborhood I chose myself, far from everything connected to the family that tried to break me. I whisper to her stories not of princesses, but of resilience, of the importance of creating something real. I explain the difference between people who offer a shoulder to lean on and those who trip you up. "Your maternal grandparents won't be a part of your life," I told her last night, though she's still too young to understand. "It's not a punishment, it's protection. You deserve to be surrounded by people who see your potential, not those who need to see you stumble." She looked at me with her huge, unfocused eyes, and the entire future was reflected in them. "You will achieve incredible things, Elena, and when that happens, I will be your loudest supporter. That's what real family is. Not blood, but faith." They once forced me into a bankruptcy courtroom, confident that they would finally brand me a failure. But instead, they were branded as fraudsters themselves. The judge learned the name of my company not because they wanted it, but because we had built something worthy of respect and protection. They thought they were shutting down a shameful business. They were trying to destroy a $189 million success story. But the triumphal march that day was not for them. The courtroom became the site of their public exposure. And now, while Vincent serves his sentence and my parents live out their days in the shadow of their own shame, Apex Defense Systems continues to grow. We continue to build. We continue to prove that the only force capable of overcoming family doubts is personal, unwavering determination. And I now have enough of that for both of us.